I want you to imagine, just for a second, an ancient, genuinely terrifying horror story.
Oh, I love a good horror setup.
Right. But this is the kind of story that just bypasses the rational brain entirely. It burrows straight into, like, the darkest, most primal parts of the human psyche.
For really uncomfortable stuff.
Exactly. So picture a god, but he's walking the earth disguised as a mortal, completely cloaking his overwhelming reality-bending nature.
Just hiding in plain sight.
Yeah. And he arrives in this prominent city, but the ruling family of that city, they look at him and they just flat out refuse to believe in his divinity.
Which is never a good idea in these ancient myths.
No. It's the worst idea. They mock him, they try to lock him up, and in response, this god doesn't just, I don't know, strike them down with a lightning bolt.
Yeah, too easy.
Right. He does something so much worse. He infects them.
Oh, wow.
He drives the women of the entire city into this wild, uncontrollable, ecstatic madness.
Yeah.
He sends them out to roam the wild mountains.
Complete psychological breakdown of the city.
Literally. And the climax of this absolute nightmare. The king of that city, a man who, staked his entire identity on maintaining logic and law and absolute order.
He's the ultimate control freak.
He is. And he is physically torn limb from limb by a mob of those frenzied women.
It's just so brutal.
And the worst part, the leader of that mob, the woman who is holding his severed head like a hunting trophy, is his own mother.
It is an unbelievably unsettling image to hold in your mind. I mean, we are not just talking about physical destruction here.
No.
We are looking at the complete, methodical, and doubly intimate dismantling of a person's reality, their family unit, their sanity. Yeah. It's psychological warfare waged by a divine being.
It is absolute visceral horror. And that, believe it or not, is the exact plot of our deep dive today.
It's going to be a heavy one.
It really is.
Right.
Because we are stepping into the world of a 2,400-year-old pagan masterwork, Euripides' famous Greek tragedy, the Bacchae.
A total classic.
Yeah. And for this deep dive, we're working primarily from the classic translation by Gilbert Murray. We're going to heavily utilize his historical notes to really understand the ancient Athenian mindset.
Which is so necessary because their worldview was just entirely different from ours.
Completely. But we are taking those ancient, blood-soaked pages and we're running them through a very specific, thoroughly modern analytical lens.
This is the part I find so fascinating.
Right. We're exploring a rigorous scholarly text written from a conservative, evangelical, canonical, biblical theology perspective.
That's quite a mouthful.
It is. But essentially, we're taking the ultimate expression of ancient Greek pagan chaos and just smashing it into the ordered worldview of Christian theology to see what sparks fly.
Which creates this profound friction. I mean, you have one text that stands as the absolute pinnacle of ancient drama, really exploring the terrifying, untamed power of the god Dionysus. And then you have another text that takes that ancient play, holds it up against the light of the Christian Bible, and meticulously analyzes all the uncanny similarities.
And the stark contrasts.
Exactly. And the profound implications for human nature.
So, before we get too deep, I want to clearly state our driving question for today. The core mission of this deep dive.
Let's hear it.
How can a violent, blood-soaked pagan play about a vindictive Greek god actually inspire Christians to love Christ more deeply and live for him more fully in their daily lives?
It's a bold question. It really is.
I know. And I should note right up front for you listening, we're dealing with a text that takes a very strong conservative evangelical stance.
Right.
And as always, we're not taking a side here. We are impartially unpacking these arguments to explore the really profound insights the source material offers regarding human nature, divine authority, and, well, the nature of worship itself.
It's going to require us to look really closely at what happens when human logic tries to build a cage around the supernatural.
Oh, I love how you put that. Building a cage around the supernatural.
Because that's exactly what happens. But to understand the theological critique of that conflict, we first have to fully grasp the myth that Euripides is dramatizing.
We have to know who Dionysus actually is when he steps onto the stage in the city of Thebes.
Right. So the play opens with a prologue. And it's delivered by Dionysus himself directly to the audience.
Breaking the fourth wall right away.
Exactly. And he's come to Thebes, which is actually his mother's home city. But he's walking around in a disguise. He introduces himself as a Lydian stranger.
A Lydian stranger. So, for an ancient Greek audience, what does Lydia actually represent?
So Lydia was located in modern-day Turkey. To the Greeks, it represented the East.
Okay.
It was exotic, it was wealthy, and it was heavily associated with sensory indulgence.
Sort of the opposite of their own ideals.
Completely opposite. It was entirely other to the structured, democratic, masculine ideals of Athens or, the mythical rigidity of Thebes.
Right.
So by calling himself Lydian, Dionysus is immediately positioning himself as an outsider. He's an invader bringing foreign, disruptive ideas into a walled city.
And he tells the audience right up front in this prologue that he is the son of Zeus and a mortal woman named Semele. And the backstory he gives for his own birth is, honestly, it's one of the strangest, most violent myths in the entire Greek canon.
Oh, without a doubt.
It's the myth of the second birth.
Right, the second birth. So Semele was a mortal princess of Thebes, and she became pregnant by Zeus.
Which usually ends terribly for the mortal women.
Always, especially because of Hera, Zeus's jealous wife. In a moment of manipulation, usually orchestrated by Hera, Semele asks Zeus to reveal himself to her in his full, unfiltered divine glory.
She wants to see the real him.
She wanted to see the god as he truly was, not just veiled in a mortal form. But mortal flesh simply cannot survive the raw, unshielded presence of a deity in Greek mythology.
It's just too much power.
Way too much. Zeus appeared to her as a blaze of miraculous blinding lightning, and Semele was instantly incinerated.
Just turned to ash.
Reduced to ash in a second. But Zeus, to save the unborn child, essentially performs this divine, desperate surgery.
This part is so wild to me.
He literally took the fetal Dionysus from the ashes and sewed the child into his own flesh.
Specifically his thigh, right?
Yes, into his thigh. He carried the baby there until it was time for him to be born.
So Dionysus is inherently dualistic from the very beginning.
Completely.
He's born of a mortal woman's destruction and then born again from the indestructible flesh of the supreme god.
And that dual nature, half mortal, half divine, born of fire and flesh, that really sets the stage for the massive conflict in Thebes.
Because Semele's mortal family doesn't buy the story.
Not for a second.
Specifically her sisters and her nephew, who happens to be the current king Pentheus. They do not believe the story of the divine birth.
No, they look at the ashes of Semele and conclude, well, she just got pregnant by some random mortal guy.
Right, and made up the story about Zeus to cover up the scandal.
Exactly. And they think she was struck by lightning as a divine punishment for lying about Zeus.
So they completely categorically deny that Dionysus is a god.
And denying a god in the landscape of Greek tragedy, that is the ultimate act of hubris.
It never goes well.
It is a fatal error in calculation. Dionysus doesn't just arrive in Thebes to say hello. He arrives to vindicate his dead mother's honor and to force the city to recognize his divinity.
And his method of doing this is just, it's terrifying.
It is.
He bypasses the men entirely. He ignores the armies, the political structures, all of it. He just strikes the women of Thebes with this ecstatic, monadic frenzy.
It alters their minds.
Yeah, he drives them out of their homes, away from their weaving, their children, all their civic duties, and sends them up onto the wild, untamed slopes of Mount Cithaeron.
Where they just roam in animal skins.
Right, wearing ivy crowns and performing his secret rites completely away from the eyes of the city.
Euripides draws such a brilliant, sharp line here. It's a thematic duality that really forms the spine of the entire play.
Explain that a bit more.
Well, on one side, you have the city. And the city represents reason, order, law, boundaries.
And King Pentheus is the ultimate champion of that side.
Exactly. And then on the other side, you have the mountain, which represents irrational, ecstasy, chaos, nature, and really the dissolution of the individual self.
And that side is ruled by Dionysus and his followers, the Bacchae.
Right. And the tension between those two spaces is electric. Because the city is where humanity builds structures to protect itself from the unpredictable forces of nature and emotion.
You need rules and hierarchies to function.
You do. You have to repress certain desires for society to work smoothly, but the mountain is where all of that gets stripped away entirely.
It's just raw nature.
Raw emotion, and the total surrender of your individual identity to a collective pulsating frenzy.
I kept picturing King Pentheus while I was reading this, and I honestly pictured him as this hyper-rational, modern technocrat.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Right. Like, if he were alive today, he'd be the guy obsessed with algorithms and efficiency and productivity metrics.
He wants a dashboard for everything.
Yes. He wants everything in his kingdom categorized, quantified, and completely under his thumb. So he looks up at the mountain, and he sees the women of his city abandoning their social roles to go dance in the woods.
And he is disgusted.
Deeply offended. He's offended by the lack of order. He basically wants to outlaw human emotion and lock this new religion in a jail cell.
Which is his fatal flaw.
Well, see, reading this, I actually found myself initially pushing back on the premise a little bit.
Really? How so?
I just kept thinking, isn't Pentheus kind of doing his job?
Okay, I see where you're going.
I mean, if you're the king and some weird cult leader comes to town, drugs half your population with some ecstatic frenzy, and empties out the city, isn't it your moral obligation to shut that down and restore order?
And that right there is exactly what Euripides desperately wants the audience to wrestle with. Because on paper, Pentheus is the defender of civilization.
Right.
If we look at Gilbert Murray's historical notes, we uncover the deep, primitive roots of Dionysus that make Pentheus's fear completely justified.
Because he wasn't just the fun god of wine.
No, not at all. Dionysus was not originally the polished marble statue Olympian god of wine that we usually picture today. He was an incredibly ancient Thracian deity.
And Thrace was.
Thrace was the wild barbarian north to the Greeks. So this god represented intoxication, yes, but also the brutal cycle of nature. The rising sap in the trees, the blood pumping in the veins, the terrifying power of animal instinct.
That is way more intense than just having a few drinks.
Oh, absolutely. Later religious movements, like Orphism, they tried to spiritualize him. They tried turning his rites into a more intellectual mysticism. But his foundational roots are deeply, uncomfortably savage.
So Pentheus is actually right to be afraid of the mountain.
He is right that chaos is a threat to human flourishing. But Euripides leaves the philosophical message incredibly nuanced here.
How so?
Unchecked frenzy destroys everything in its path. But Pentheus's response, this tyrannical, arrogant, rigid attempt to completely crush the irrational, emotional, spiritual side of the human experience, that is just as dangerous.
Because you can't just mandate human emotion out of existence.
Exactly. Pentheus is so rigid that he cannot bend, which means he is destined to break. The play really suggests that repressing the irrational forces of human nature, just refusing to acknowledge that there are psychological and spiritual realities vastly larger than human logic, it doesn't eliminate those forces.
It just pressurizes them.
Yes, it pressurizes them. Pentheus is trying to build a fragile wooden dam to hold back a supernatural tsunami, and he is going to get swept away.
And this exact moment, where the city's failed attempt to control collides with the reality of the wild. That's where the play shifts from a political debate into profound supernatural terror.
The messenger speech.
Yes. A messenger comes down from Mount Cithron to report to Pentheus exactly what this tsunami looks like. And the messenger's report is just a masterclass in shifting tone.
Because it starts out so beautifully.
It really does. At first, he paints this incredibly beautiful, almost Eden-like picture of the women in the woods.
The messenger describes a scene of absolute miraculous harmony with the earth. The women wake up peacefully in the forest. One woman takes her thyrsus, her ivy-covered wand, and strikes a rock, and a crystal-clear spring of water gushes out.
From striking a rock.
Yes. Another plants her wand into the soil, and a fountain of dark, rich wine bubbles to the surface.
It's incredible.
They scratch the earth with their bare fingers, and milk flows out. The ivy wands themselves are dripping with sweet golden honey.
It sounds amazing.
It is a vision of paradise. It's a return to a golden age where the earth provides endless abundance without the curse of human toil or agricultural labor.
It sounds like the ultimate utopian dream. But then the local villagers, acting on Pentheus's strict orders, try to ambush the women and drag them back to the city.
A huge mistake.
Massive. Because the moment human authority tries to assert control over the divine frenzy, that Eden-like dream instantly flips into a waking nightmare.
The turn is so fast.
It's whiplash. The women turn their attention away from the villagers and instead attack a massive herd of grazing cattle. And the messenger describes, in agonizing graphic detail, a ritual dismemberment.
The sparagmos.
Yes. The Greek term for it is sparagmos. These women, using absolutely no weapons, just their bare, soft hands, descend on these massive live bulls and physically tear them to pieces.
Oh, with their bare hands.
They rip ribs and hooves away from the living animals.
Yeah.
The messenger talks about strips of flesh left hanging from the pine trees, dripping blood onto the forest floor.
And this concept of the sparagmos is central to understanding the true nature of the Dionysian cult.
Because it's not about food.
No, this is not a hunt for sustenance. It is violence for the sake of the ecstatic experience itself. It is the literal, brutal tearing apart of living flesh in order to access the raw, pulsating life force within the animal.
That's so dark.
It represents the ultimate dissolution of form and boundaries. And what makes it so terrifying is the power differential. When the armed villagers realize what is happening, they try to fight back.
They throw their spears at them,
Right, iron-tipped spears.
but the spears do nothing. The weapons just bounce off the women's skin. They are entirely invulnerable to human iron, and then the women counterattack.
And this part is wild.
They throw their soft, leafy ivy wands at the armed men, and those wands hit like artillery shells.
Just blasting them backward.
Yes, blasting heavily armed men backward, wounding them and routing the entire village. It's a complete, horrifying inversion of the natural laws of physics and combat.
If we pull back and look at what this reveals about the Greek worldview, it really underscores the profound, chilling pitilessness of their gods.
Pitilessness is the perfect word.
Dionysus embodies the promise of total release from civic restraint. He offers freedom from the crushing burdens of logic, law, and daily responsibility. But the cost of that ticket is absolute.
You don't get it for free.
No. To fully participate in this divine release, you have to surrender your humanity.
It makes me think about modern psychology, specifically the drive toward extreme escapism.
Oh, that's an interesting parallel.
Well, when people are drowning in the pressures of modern life, when the order of their existence feels like a suffocating prison, there's this deep primal urge to just obliterate the self.
Right.
We see it in severe substance abuse or people losing themselves in radical mob mentality movements, even just doom scrolling into a dissociative state. It's a desire to completely numb the pain of the world.
To just turn off the brain entirely.
Exactly. But when that desire for total release is left totally unchecked, it inevitably turns self-destructive. You lose your cognitive reasoning, your fundamental identity, and you end up tearing apart your own life and the people around you, much like the sparagmos.
The ancient Greeks understood that psychological mechanism perfectly. The messenger explicitly notes that the Dionysian release reduces these mothers and wives to wild beasts.
Not themselves anymore.
Not at all. They are no longer thinking, feeling, rational human beings. They have become hollowed-out instruments of the gods' raw, unthinking power. There's absolutely no compassion, no empathy, no higher moral reasoning on the mountain.
Just ecstasy and violence.
There is only ecstasy, and there is violence.
And this exact mechanism where unchecked spiritual escapism devolves into pure animalistic destruction that is precisely the theological tripwire that our Old Testament analysis zeroes in on.
Yes, the biblical perspective.
Because the ancient Hebrews, whose worldview fundamentally shapes the biblical text, they had their own encounters with this kind of Bacchic frenzy. And they had a completely different framework for understanding it.
They absolutely did. When you read the theological breakdown of this dynamic, the parallels between the events in the Bacchae and key moments of rebellion in the Old Testament are just striking.
Where does the analysis start?
It starts by looking at King Pentheus. His stubborn, arrogant refusal to acknowledge a power greater than himself mirrors several Old Testament figures who reject Yahweh.
Like Pharaoh.
The classic example is Pharaoh in the book of Exodus. Pharaoh repeatedly hardens his heart, looks at miraculous signs, and refuses to yield his own authority.
Which doesn't end well for him either.
No, it ultimately brings catastrophic plagues and the collapse of the Red Sea down upon his own head.
So Pentheus mirrors Pharaoh's political and spiritual arrogance. But what about the women on the mountain?
The chaos side of things.
Right. Because when I read the description of the sparagmos and the wild dancing, my mind instantly went to Moses coming down Mount Sinai.
Ah, the golden calf.
Exactly. He has the tablets of the law, literally the ultimate symbol of divine order, and he looks down at the camp and sees the Israelites losing their collective minds around the golden calf. Is that the connection the biblical theology is making?
That is exactly the connection. While Moses is on the mountain receiving a structured covenantal law, the people at the base of the mountain throw off all restraint.
They just lose it.
Exodus 32 describes them building an idol and engaging in wild orgiastic revelry. It is a complete societal collapse into chaos.
Just like Thebes.
Very much like it. And another vivid example is found in 1 Kings 18 with the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel.
Oh, that's a crazy scene.
It's incredibly intense. They are leaping frantically around their altar, crying out in ecstatic frenzies and physically cutting themselves with swords and lances until their blood flows, all trying desperately to provoke their god into action.
And the scholarly text digs into the linguistics of this, right? It looks at how the ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, the Septuagint, actually describes these moments.
Yes, the linguistic choices are fascinating here. When the Septuagint translates the Hebrew words referring to idols or the making of idols, it frequently uses the Greek word poiemata.
Poiemata. What did that signify?
It implies things that are merely manufactured, lifeless objects constructed by human hands. It highlights the emptiness of the object of worship.
Okay, so it's emphasizing that it's fake.
Right, but when it describes the auditory experience of this idolatrous worship, the sounds coming from the camp around the golden calf or the prophets of Baal, it uses the word kraug.
Kraug. What does that actually mean in a Greek context? Like, what did that sound like to them?
It is not a structured hymn. It is not a sung prayer. Kraugo is an inarticulate, visceral, animalistic shriek.
Whoa.
It's the sound of a riot, the roar of a mob that has entirely lost its rational mind.
So it's that loss of humanity again.
Exactly. The theological argument here centers on a deliberate, profound contrast. The chaotic, deafening noise and physical self-destruction of pagan idolatry stands in absolute opposition to the covenantal order, the structured revelation, and the life-affirming nature of God's relationship with his people.
Okay, I have to pause and challenge this framework, though.
Let's do it.
Let's look at the basic narrative math of both stories. In the Bacchae, Pentheus denies the divinity of Dionysus, and Dionysus punishes him with horrifying violence.
True.
In the Old Testament, Pharaoh denies the divinity of Yahweh. Yahweh punishes him with terrifying plagues, boils, hail, and the death of the firstborn.
Also true.
If both of these figures are brutally punished for denying a god, isn't the God of the Bible acting just like Dionysus here? Are they both just angry, vindictive deities demanding absolute, unquestioning submission from mortals?
That is a highly critical question, and it's exactly the philosophical objection this evangelical perspective anticipates and deconstructs.
Okay, how do they deconstruct it?
The analysis argues that while on the very surface, human rebellion invites divine judgment in both narratives, the fundamental nature of the gods, their ultimate goals, and what they actually demand from humanity are diametrically opposed.
How so?
The biblical framework sharply critiques the Dionysian ecstasy, not merely as a different flavor of religion, but as a false worship, specifically a demonic counterfeit.
A demonic counterfeit. What does a counterfeit mean in this context? A counterfeit of what exactly?
It's a counterfeit of the human soul's inherent design for spiritual transcendence.
Oh, interesting.
In this theological view, human beings are made in the image of God. We were designed to connect with the divine. Dionysus hijacks that deep, legitimate desire for transcendence and warps it.
By taking away their minds.
Yes. He demands a surrender that actively destroys the mind, obliterates the individual personality, and results in orgiastic, self-destructive release. He wants his followers to regress, to become animals driven by instinct.
And
Yahweh, conversely, demands holiness, justice, and the flourishing of ordered creation. Just look at the very first chapter of the Bible, Genesis 1. God speaks into the primordial watery chaos and brings forth structure, rhythm, boundaries, and life.
Bringing order out of chaos.
Exactly. The Old Testament insists that true worship is about covenantal obedience, freely aligning your mind and will with that divine, life-giving order. It is never about losing your mind in ritual madness.
So the distinction is directionality.
That's a great way to put it.
Dionysus takes order and shatters it into chaos to prove his power. Yahweh takes chaos and carefully shapes it into order to share his life. That is a massive paradigm shift, and it perfectly sets up what I consider the most fascinating, mind-bending part of our deep dive.
The New Testament connection.
The New Testament connections. Because if the Old Testament firmly condemns the frantic chaos of the mountain, the New Testament introduces a narrative about Jesus that shares some uncanny, surface-level similarities with the myth of Dionysus.
The parallels are undeniably striking, and they have been the subject of intense, sometimes controversial academic debate for over a century.
I can imagine.
The scholarly analysis lists several points of intersection. For instance, the core setup of the Bacchae features Dionysus as the disguised stranger god who comes to his own ancestral city, Thebes, and is vehemently rejected by his own flesh and blood.
And in the New Testament?
You turn to the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verse 11, and it says of Jesus, he came to his own, and his own people did not receive him.
And the miracles.
Yes, the miracles.
Dionysus' signature sign on the mountain is making a fountain of wine spring miraculously from the earth to provide for his followers. If you look at Jesus' very first recorded miracle in the Gospel of John, chapter 2, what does he do?
The wedding at Cana.
He goes to a wedding in Cana, and when the wine runs out, He miraculously turns vats of purification water into the finest wine.
The narrative echoes extend into the Book of Acts as well.
Oh, right, the prison breaks.
In the Bacchae, King Pentheus manages to briefly imprison Dionysus, but it is an illusion of control. Dionysus miraculously escapes. The chains simply fall away from his wrists, and the heavy prison doors swing open untouched by any human guard.
It's almost verbatim in Acts.
It is. We see incredibly similar miraculous prison breaks in Acts. In Acts 12, an angel frees Peter, the chains falling off his wrists and the iron gate opening by itself. Later in Acts 16, an earthquake opens the prison doors and loosens the bonds of Paul and Silas.
And the followers are another overlap. Dionysus is surrounded by this fiercely devoted band of female followers, the Maenads, who stay loyal to him when the powerful men of the city try to destroy him.
Right.
Jesus is similarly followed and supported by a devoted group of women, many of whom bravely remain at the foot of the cross and are the very first witnesses at the empty tomb, long after the male disciples have fled in terror.
The parallels just keep stacking up.
And then there is the linguistic smoking gun.
Yes, the exact phrase.
There is an exact phrase shared identically between Euripides' play and the New Testament. In the Bacchae, Dionysus warns Pentheus that his resistance is futile, telling him it is useless to kick against the goads.
And a goad is a sharp stick used to steer cattle, for context.
Right. In Acts 26:14, the resurrected Jesus appears in a blinding light to Paul on the road to Damascus and says the exact same Greek idiom. It is hard for you to kick against the goads.
When you lay those data points out back to back, it is very easy to see why some fringe scholars over the years have argued for direct literary borrowing.
Plagiarism, basically.
They propose the idea that the gospel writers, particularly John and Luke, literally plagiarized elements of Euripides' play to make their new Messiah seem more impressive to a Greek audience.
It's the ultimate who copied whom scenario.
Exactly.
It's like when two movies come out in the exact same year, featuring the exact same highly specific plot twist. As an audience member, your brain instantly tries to figure out who stole the script.
It is a natural human reaction to look for the plagiarism. However, the conservative evangelical text we are analyzing offers a much more historically grounded and nuanced explanation.
Okay, what's their take?
They argue that these overlaps are not derivations or lazy copying. They are what scholars call polemical contrast or deliberate cultural subversion.
Deliberate cultural subversion, meaning the biblical writers are intentionally using the similarities to make a targeted argument against the original Dionysian myth.
Precisely. We have to remember the socio-historical context of the first-century Greco-Roman world. The gospel writers were not writing in a vacuum.
Right, these myths were everywhere.
They were communicating in an environment heavily steeped in these specific pagan myths. The cult of Dionysus was massively popular, offering this intoxicating promise of spiritual liberation and miraculous provision.
So how do the gospel writers use that?
The argument here is that writers like John and Luke intentionally utilize these highly familiar cultural tropes to exalt the true divinity of Christ by way of contrast.
They're hijacking the narrative.
Essentially, yes. They're saying to their Greco-Roman audience, you know the ancient myths of a god who miraculously provides wine, who shatters iron chains, who is rejected by his own city. You have built your culture around these shadows, but we are here to introduce you to the reality.
Wow.
And this reality is rooted not in a mythic, chaotic frenzy, but in ordered, historical, verifiable revelation.
I absolutely love that framing. It's like a musician taking a well-known chaotic melody and remixing it into a soaring, perfect symphony.
That's a perfect analogy.
They aren't ignoring the surrounding culture. They are hijacking its vocabulary to say, Jesus is the true vine. He is the actual liberator. But to fully grasp why this theological perspective insists that Christ is the superior solution, we have to return to the play.
We have to see how the play ends.
We have to go back to the Bacchae and witness the climax. We have to look at the ultimate destination of Dionysian salvation. Because the play takes a dark turn that strips away any illusion of divine benevolence.
It gets so dark. The climax centers entirely on the psychological destruction of King Pentheus. Dionysus does not defeat Pentheus by simply overpowering him with a lightning bolt or divine strength.
That'll be too quick.
He destroys him from the inside out. He sets a brilliant, cruel, psychological trap. Over the course of their interrogations, Dionysus realizes that underneath Pentheus's rigid, puritanical, hypermasculine exterior, there is a deep, repressed, voyeuristic desire.
Oh, right.
Pentheus desperately wants to see what the women are doing on the mountain in secret.
It is a terrifying manipulation. Dionysus basically hypnotizes the king. He slithers into Pentheus's mind and exploits that dark, obsessive curiosity. And the humiliation Dionysus inflicts before the violence even begins is excruciating to read.
A disguise.
Yeah. He convinces Pentheus, the proud ruler of Thebes, that the only way he can safely spy on the women is to disguise himself as one of them.
And Pentheus goes along with it.
He does. Dionysus dresses the king in a long woman's robe, places a snood on his head, and drapes a fawn skin over his shoulder. He then leads the cross-dressing king, whose mind is completely unraveling, through the main streets of his own city.
In broad daylight.
Yes. Dionysus is practically giggling at him, adjusting his hem, mocking how pretty he looks. Pentheus is stripped of all his dignity, his gender identity, and his sanity before he even reaches the woods.
And then they arrive at the foothills of Mount Cithaeron. Pentheus complains that he cannot see the women clearly through the dense brush.
So Dionysus helps him.
In the worst way possible. Dionysus performs a terrifying slow-motion display of supernatural physics. He takes a massive, towering pine tree and, with impossible strength, bends the very top of the tree all the way down to the earth.
Bends a whole pine tree.
A massive pine. He carefully seats Pentheus on the highest, most precarious branch. And then, slowly, deliberately, he lets the tree spring back up into the sky.
Leaving him trapped.
He launches the king high into the air, leaving him trapped, silhouetted against the sky, completely exposed to the entire valley of frenzied women below.
And the second Pentheus is trapped at the top of that tree. The disguise falls away. Dionysus vanishes into thin air. A blinding flash of divine fire touches the earth and the sky, and a booming supernatural voice echoes across the entire mountain, calling out to the women.
Behold, I bring you the man who makes a mockery of you and me and our holy rites. Take your vengeance.
What follows is the horrific ultimate realization of the sparagmos we discussed earlier. But this time the victim is not a grazing bull.
No.
It is the king of the city.
The women swarm the base of the pine tree like a pack of starving wolves. They try throwing rocks, pulling at the roots, and finally, driven by supernatural strength, they literally uproot the massive tree from the ground.
They rip the tree out of the ground.
Pentheus comes crashing down to the earth, screaming, realizing that his mind is clear and he is about to die. And the very first person to reach him is his own mother, Agave.
This part is so hard to read.
It is. She is so deeply, utterly blinded by the Bacchic possession that she looks down at her own terrified son, who is reaching out, touching her cheek, begging for his life, crying, "Mother, it is I, Pentheus, your child, have pity."
And she doesn't recognize him.
She does not recognize him. The god has warped her vision so completely that she believes she is looking at a wild lone lion.
Euripides' description of the physical violence here is agonizingly specific.
It really is.
Agave puts her foot squarely against her son's ribs to gain leverage. She grips his arm, and with a monstrous strength granted by the god, she tears his arm completely out of its shoulder socket.
Just horrifying.
Then her sisters and the rest of the mob descend upon him, and they systematically pull the king to pieces.
The text actually says that after the initial dismemberment, the women were tossing pieces of his torn flesh around to each other, practically playing catch with the bloody remnants of their king.
And then Agave claims her prize.
A trophy.
She takes his severed head, impales it on the sharp end of her thyrsus, her sacred ivy wand, and marches proudly back down the mountain and into the city of Thebes. She is completely euphoric, boasting to anyone who will listen, cradling her own son's severed head as if it were a glorious hunting trophy.
It is the absolute pinnacle of tragic irony. A mother believing she has achieved the highest state of spiritual ecstasy while holding the definitive proof of her complete and total destruction.
This is the part of the play that absolutely wrecks me. It is devastating precisely because Agave thought she was experiencing spiritual liberation.
She genuinely believed it.
She genuinely believed she was worshiping the divine. But in reality, she was just being used as a disposable weapon in a petty, vindictive squabble between a god and a mortal king. How does Euripides resolve this immense, suffocating trauma? Does Dionysus step back in to heal the wounds he created?
The resolution is what highlights the vast, unbridgeable gulf between human suffering and divine indifference in ancient Greek mythology.
He doesn't help her.
No. Agave marches into the city, still in her trance, boasting to her elderly father, Cadmus, about the lion she has slain. Now, Cadmus has just returned from the mountain himself. He has spent hours walking through the woods, gathering the bloody, scattered, mutilated pieces of his grandson's body.
So he knows exactly what she's holding.
He knows. And he is the one who has to perform this agonizing psychological intervention. He speaks to Agave very gently. He tells her to look up at the sky, to focus on the light, and slowly, painstakingly, he walks her mind back to reality.
That is so heartbreaking.
Her vision clears, the divine frenzy evaporates, she looks down at the trophy in her hands, and the full weight of her reality crashes down on her.
The psychological horror of that specific moment, waking up from a spiritual high, feeling a momentary sense of peace, and then looking down to realize you have butchered your own child.
The evangelical source material focuses very heavily on the emotional contrast in this final scene. The humans, Cadmus and Agave, are utterly broken. They are weeping, holding each other, showing deep, profound sympathy and pity for one another's agony.
They show humanity.
Yes, they have been destroyed by the gods, but in their destruction they are profoundly, beautifully human. And then Dionysus appears to deliver the final judgment. But he doesn't stand on the ground with them in the dirt and the blood.
No, he's above them.
He appears elevated, literally deus ex machina, floating above them on a cloud or the roof of the palace. He is utterly, chillingly ruthless.
He doesn't offer a single word of apology. He doesn't show an ounce of pity or remorse for tricking a mother into murdering her child.
None at all. His tone is essentially bureaucratic. He simply states that the ruling family mocked him, that this horrific slaughter is their punishment, and that the entire affair was predestined by the will of Zeus.
Just filing paperwork on their trauma.
Exactly. He sentences Agave, who is already shattered, to permanent exile from her home. He casually curses Cadmus, the grieving grandfather, telling him he will be turned into a snake.
A snake?
A snake! When Cadmus and Agave fall to their knees and cry out to him, pleading that the punishment was far too severe, his only response is a cold dismissal. Too late. You knew me not when you should have known me.
And that horrific, cold-blooded, utterly hopeless resolution is exactly where the theological analysis steps in to answer our core mission today.
How does this inspire a modern Christian?
Yes. How does this bleak, traumatic, ancient story inspire anyone?
It inspires by stark, terrifying contrast. The scholarly text argues that Euripides actually arrived at a profound, enduring human truth. If you try to repress our deeply flawed, irrational, emotional human nature purely through logic, laws, and societal structures...
Like Pentheus did.
Right. If you try to build a city without grace or divine connection, it will inevitably lead to an explosion of chaos. The source links this ancient Greek insight directly to the Apostle Paul's argument in Romans chapter 1.
What does Romans 1 say?
It posits that human beings must acknowledge divine reality and their need for a creator, or they will inevitably face the devastating judgment of their own corrupted, unchecked desires.
So the biblical theology actually agrees with Euripides that Pentheus was wrong. We desperately need the divine. True worship does require a complete surrender of our illusion of control.
Yes, that need is valid.
But according to the Christian source, the Dionysian solution to that need is a total nightmare.
Absolutely.
It offers a temporary emotional release, a spiritual high that ultimately demands the sacrifice of your humanity and ends in violence, isolation, and death.
Precisely. The Bible heavily and explicitly critiques this kind of ecstatic, mind-erasing frenzy. And the scholarly analysis uses a brilliant, highly specific piece of Greek grammatical analysis to hammer this point home, looking at a famous Pauline contrast in the New Testament.
Okay, let's hear the grammar breakdown.
In his letter to the Ephesians, chapter 5, verse 18, Paul writes a directive to the early church. Do not get drunk on wine, which leads to debauchery. Instead, be filled with the Spirit.
Okay, telling people not to get drunk on wine in the first century Greco-Roman world feels like a very pointed, direct shot at the cult of Dionysus.
It is an unmistakable cultural reference, but the much deeper theological contrast is found in the specific Greek grammar Paul uses for the phrase, be filled with the Spirit.
What's unique about the grammar?
The author of our analysis points out that Paul uses a present imperative tense here. In ancient Greek, a present imperative is not a command for a singular, isolated event. It dictates an ongoing, continuous state of being.
So the literal translation isn't get filled up once and let it wear off. It's more like be continually, constantly being filled.
Exactly. It foregrounds an ongoing daily state of self-control and ordered, sustainable joy. This contrasts sharply with the Dionysian experience, which is fundamentally episodic.
You have to keep going back to the mountain.
Right. You drink the wine, you lose your mind in the woods, you experience a chaotic temporary dissipation, and then you wake up hungover, empty, or, in Agave's case, surrounded by destruction.
Wow.
In this Christian theology, the Holy Spirit does not possess you, erase your personality, and use your body like a meat puppet. The Spirit fills you and actively empowers your own self-control.
It enhances who you are instead of erasing you.
Exactly. As Paul writes in Galatians, the very fruit of the Spirit, the evidence of divine presence, includes patience, gentleness, and self-control.
That is a massive structural paradigm shift. Dionysian possession demands the destruction of the self to please the god. Christian filling demands the surrender of the self so that God can restore and perfect it.
That's beautifully said.
And the scholarly text mentions that historical theologians noticed this exact contrast very early on in church history, didn't they?
Yes, the analysis heavily references patristic engagement, patristic referring to the early church fathers. Thinkers and apologists like Clement of Alexandria and Origen, who lived in the 2nd and 3rd centuries.
Because they lived in a world where this was still happening.
Precisely. They lived in a world where the myth of Dionysus wasn't just a dusty play. It was a potent, living cultural force. People were still worshiping this way. And thinkers like Clement explicitly used quotes and imagery from the Bacchae in their own theological writings.
To make the contrast clear.
To aggressively contrast the vindictive, pitiless nature of Dionysus with the merciful, self-sacrificing nature of Jesus of Nazareth.
It makes me think of an analogy to crystallize the difference between these two visions of the divine.
Oh, I'd love to hear it.
Imagine two vastly different kinds of leaders. Dionysus is the ultimate manipulative cult leader. He demands absolute, unquestioning submission. And to prove his supreme power, he will break you down, strip away your identity, isolate you from your family, and use you to destroy your own community.
And then blame you for it.
Yes. And when you are finally broken on the floor, surrounded by the wreckage of your life, he stands on a balcony above you, totally untouched, and says, "You should have respected me."
He is a divine tyrant who rules by dissolving the individual into a mindless collective.
Yes. But Christ, as presented in the biblical theology we're analyzing, is a leader who steps directly into the dirt and the chaos.
It comes down to their level.
And instead of demanding that you be torn apart to prove his power, he allows himself to be torn apart to save you. He doesn't demand asparagmos from his followers. He takes asparagmos upon himself on the cross. He absorbs the violence of the world so you don't have to.
That analogy captures the very heart of the theological argument perfectly. The analysis concludes that reading a brutal pagan play like the Bacchae inspires Christians precisely by showing them the terrifying, pitch-black alternative.
It's the shadow that proves the light.
It holds up a mirror to a reality governed by a God who demands surrender through madness, fear, and vengeance. By forcing yourself to look deeply into that dark, hopeless mirror, the beauty, order, and grace of the Christian gospel becomes infinitely brighter and more precious.
That makes so much sense.
God provides what the text calls a superior solution in what the Gospel of John describes as spirit and truth devotion.
John 4:23-24. Jesus says true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. Not just raw, unthinking, chaotic spirit like the bloody maenads on Mount Cithron.
Right.
And not just rigid, lifeless, suffocating truth like the doomed King Pentheus in the city. It requires the integration of both.
It is the perfect synthesis. Christ offers a redemptive, lasting victory over the chaos of sin and the finality of death. He absolutely demands complete surrender, just as Dionysus did, just as any claim to absolute truth must.
But the reward is different.
The reward is entirely different. He rewards that surrender not with a horrifying loss of identity or a descent into animalistic violence. He rewards it with enhanced self-control, authentic empowerment, a restoration of the mind, and profound, enduring mercy.
This has been an incredibly heavy, fascinating journey today. We started in the mythical, sun-baked streets of ancient Thebes, watching a disguised, undercover god bring a terrifying, mind-shattering chaos to a proud, rigid king.
It was quite a trip.
We witnessed the unimaginable horror of the sparagmos on the slopes of Mount Cithron, the ultimate suffocating tragedy of a mother waking up to her own violence, and the cold, distant, bureaucratic cruelty of the Greek pantheon.
And from those ancient horrors, we traced how a conservative evangelical theology utilizes that dark backdrop to illuminate a stark, beautiful contrast.
It really reframes the whole play.
It highlights the profound differences between a God of frenzy and the merciful Christ, emphasizing the ordered, life-giving empowerment that comes from the continuous filling of the Holy Spirit.
It is a powerful reminder that these ancient 2,400-year-old texts aren't just dusty relics meant to be skimmed in a high school literature class.
No, they are incredibly relevant.
They are actively wrestling with the deepest, most urgent, most terrifying questions of the human condition. Which brings me to a final thought. I want to leave you with you listening to this right now.
It's a good thought to chew on.
The ancient Greeks, for all their mythic brutality, instinctively knew something profoundly true about you and me. They knew that the human soul is simply too vast, too turbulent, and too deeply emotional to ever be satisfied by mere civic rules, logic, and the endless spreadsheets of daily life.
We need more than just order.
We are fundamentally built with a burning, inescapable craving for transformative encounter with the divine. We desperately want to be part of something far bigger than ourselves. If a pagan culture, thousands of years ago, could so vividly, violently recognize our desperate, aching need to be consumed by something greater, how much more vibrantly, how much more confidently should you step into the daily life-giving surrender offered not by a God of chaotic frenzy, but by the God of self-sacrificing love? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking the hard questions, keep reading the old difficult texts, and keep exploring those unexpected, shadowy places where ancient stories meet enduring truths.